I'm Shwa, and you are listening to Light Up with Shwa, a weekly podcast to open our hearts and minds on a journey with me. Hello and good afternoon, Jonathan Perry.
Hello, Waniki-sak.
Waniki-sak, that is how you say it?
That is a good day in
Waniki-sak.
Wampanoag, which would be our language for the Wampanoag Nation.
Thank you. Oh, that's wonderful. So how do you say hello?
You can say cha if you'd like, which
Cha?
is hi, hello.
Hi, cha. Is there
Cha.
any other word also?
Waniki-sak.
Waniki-sak.
Depending on the time of day.
Okay.
You may say good morning or good afternoon or good evening or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
You could say Kawikwa-san, which is specifically in the early light hours of the day, and speaks to when the first light touches your skin.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for taking out time, and thank you for being here. This is a Thanksgiving week, so I wanted to get a perspective from the native person. What do you think Thanksgiving is and was and is?
There's so many ways to answer the question of what Thanksgiving symbolizes and means to Indigenous people or to Wampanoag people or to modern Americans, which Native people obviously are a part of. It's a hard question to answer, even from my perspective. Ultimately, we're children or we're young adults, and we're raised in a society that has a 5-day work week and has a 5-day school period for children. So you look to the weekends and you look for those holidays as a special time to have off, right? Just to spend time with your family or to go see a movie or to go hiking or fishing or, whatever it is that you do, and the way that you reconnect to your normal life from these sort of forced distractions or necessities for development, right? And so I think we're caught in a funny place where we as Native people still recognize the need for time off and for celebration time and to reconnect with family and get rid of that stress that's built up over time, right? And so on one hand, we're celebrating a period of time where we're able to just relax and do that, go for a hike in the woods or, something of that nature. On the other hand, it's focused on a time in history that brought about a great deal of change and horrific life loss of rights, loss of religious freedom, loss of continuity, loss of our economy, right? I mean, ultimately, the country is celebrating this particular arrival of a vessel and a small group of people who had no legal right to set foot on and take resources from an established and long-standing nation that existed in that area of. I mean, that's just one section of our entire tribal nation, and our tribal nation sits on just one section of a continent covered by tribal nations that had borders, rights, laws, a system of doing things, and governmental protocols and leadership, etc. So those were existing things that go back to the time of the glacial moraine that existed here. And we don't actually know how far back it goes. I mean, ultimately, archaeology can prove 13 to 14,000 years in just my region alone of continual life and habitation by indigenous people. But then we really don't know what the glacial tilling that occurred eradicated, right? So there's a lot of different things here wrapped up in this story. For me, as a modern Wampanoag person who studies history and has worked in museums and interpreted this period of time and talked about older information and our continuance up to present day activities as indigenous people, my whole view of it is that we are not important because we happen to be living in a specific piece of land where a boat full of people from another place saw us, wrote a little bit about us, and were dependent upon us to keep them alive. Right? That Mayflower arrival off the coast in 1620, November 9th of 1620, the first landing on the shore on November 11th of 1620, and the subsequent sort of looting that occurred on the Cape when they dug into corn storage pits and stole the resources out of the food stores that Native people had set for the winter. The unearthing of burials out on the Cape, and then, of course, the the response that they got, basically, of Nauset Wampanoag people attacking them and driving them off of Cape Cod was a response to people who didn't come ashore and immediately seek out leadership and have a discussion about whether they had the right to stop in, whether they were welcome, whether they could rely on people to help support them, since they arrived at the worst time of year, and really the onset of winter, with very little resources and no knowledge of the land. So obviously they were going to be dependent on Native people, whether it was through stealing resources that they thought no one could stop them from taking, or wouldn't be around for that period of time, or whether they were going to physically be demanding food and shelter. So ultimately, from an indigenous point of view, it was a time of change, but it wasn't really a defining moment for my nation. It's some unfortunate occurrences in a long-standing history of my people. From obviously a English perspective, it was a pivotal moment because it was the first attempted colony in the northern part of what they were calling the New World. What we would typically refer to as Turtle Island, speaking to the creation stories of how the turtle held the first land that was brought up from the bottom of the sea, and then the turtle grew to a massive size, and the earth covered that turtle's back, and that was the creation of the land for us to walk upon and live upon, because we couldn't exist in the water. And so to us, Turtle Island is a sacred place that has in perpetuity provided all of our needs and protection and nourishment, and is the mother of our existence, right? For the English, it was a resource-rich area that they could establish businesses on to increase their profits or their holdings or their family names in another country. And I think that this society, in a lot of ways, has has built up upon those same principles, even though the families are now however many generations into this immigration, right? So they're 20 generations in, or whatever the number of generations are since the Mayflower, or if you're talking about Virginia, the earlier period of 1600, 1607, I think, around that time frame. There's not this many thousands of years of developing a society and a balance and a view of the resources. There's not the careful monitoring of resource use and development to protect your water sources and your food sources and your efforts to maintain a very carefully crafted society for time immemorial, right? And for many future generations. That's not the mindset, right? The English arrived, they were driven off the Cape, they sailed north around along the coastline and end up putting in to Plymouth Harbor, where they kind of quote unquote settle. Essentially, they squatted because they went into a very coastal area in the early winter, when Wampanoag people would have completely moved from the coastal areas and moved into sheltered valleys
for the winter
into
time.
our winter homes, yes, because no one wants to live on the beach in New England in the winter. It's tough.
It's different. Yeah.
And so Wampanoag people established two village sites essentially, and had big winter homes and small summer houses, because in the summertime you would spend most of your time outdoors, and you would be fishing, or you'd be swimming at the beach, or you would be out growing corn and harvesting your first berries like strawberries and things of that nature that you're encouraging to grow around your community. So you're pretty busy, but you're also enjoying the beautiful weather that the outdoors has, what is provided in New England. So when the English arrive, there's an area that's kind of impacted negatively by sicknesses. It's believed because there was exposed remains of people. There were houses that were falling to ruin. So very near to that arrival time, sicknesses had affected the Patuxet area of Plymouth, what is referred to as Plymouth today. Patuxet is our name for it. And between people not being on the coastline and not monitoring things because of the time of year, or not monitoring as regularly because of population impacts in certain areas, as a result of European sicknesses that were coming through with slavers and fishermen and explorers and harvesters of goods, resources like wood. Those interactions caused sicknesses to start to infiltrate our societies. That was a problem that we were unfortunately dealing with in the 15 and 1600s, and it took us quite a long time to find our balance in that, because we're now being exposed to sicknesses we had no familiarity
That's
with.
what I was going to ask, and thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask, did you have diseases or sicknesses like similar to what you were encountering at that time? No,
not really. There's actually very little to no known sicknesses that are, originate from our society. I mean, we were very clean people, so
very
the English
alternative,
actually,
like herbalist, the things that you guys use. I mean, I'm learning a little bit about it, but I'm very on the alternative side as well.
Yes.
So there are so
And
many native herbs that they say this is native from here. So
yes.
it's like, yeah, of course. I mean, there must be
Well,
some healing.
and even today, I think the estimates are 65% of modern pharmaceuticals are synthetic copies of native medicines from here. A good portion of those medicines originating in the Northeast, or were similar medicines to the what were being produced by similar species of plants and certain methods of making medicines in other parts of the country too. Because obviously, our people didn't exist in bubbles. We had a great deal of commerce and trade, and we had access with many tribal nations through our waterways and highways that we built. As a matter of fact, the English, when they landed in Plymouth, they talk about how they built upon the highway. So that wasn't an English highway. That was a native main road, which became what's known as Route 3 today in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and goes all the way to the Cape and all the way up to Boston area. So a lot of the highways and a lot of the main routes, a lot of the railways across the United States were built on established native roads that the English said in the 1600s were better maintained and better established than anything you would find in Europe. So very different, obviously, from the unpeopled, unimproved landscape that the English touted in their journals or their writings that gave them sort of this idea that they could just take as much as they wanted. That was the mindset, because the people here didn't look like them or speak like them, because we didn't go to church, because we didn't improve, quote unquote, improve the land in their fashion. We didn't deserve to have it, and we didn't have a right to claim it. So, which they themselves contradict in every writing they make in that time period. So, they talk about it being unpeopled, and then they talk about all the, thousands, tens of thousands of people that they see on a regular basis. They talk about no improvements, and then they talk about superior roads than what they have. They talk about how we were primitive, and yet constantly talk about how much better everything that we did was than the way they did it in their own lands. To the point that they talk about alcoholic beverages freezing in their houses in the winter, and our houses so hot that they had to shed layers of clothing because they were overheating and sweating, and it was uncomfortable. So
this you're talking from the books or whatever they wrote in the history?
Absolutely. That's, Plymouth Plantation, written by William Bradford. That's, Mort's Relations being written by Edward Winslow. That's, the various first and second person sources of the time period, ship's journals, individual writings of people who were interacting in that time period. And so, but there's ultimately a lot to it. For Wampanoag people, I think, as I said before, we're torn because we have time off, and because it's a convenient period in which to feast and acknowledge family, or to travel and visit family if you're away from them. If you're a native person, a native student going to a university, the schools typically give part of this week off for folks to reconnect with their families. So whether you like it or not as a native person, whether you would wish to protest Thanksgiving or to not regard it in any way, shape, or form, you're forced to acknowledge it in some fashion, because you can't just go to a store on a normal schedule because people are home on this holiday. You are encouraged to eat certain foods in celebration of this holiday because it's on sale, because it's readily available, because other things aren't available at the same time. So it's really, it's hard to not acknowledge it if you wanted to pretend it didn't exist, really. Ultimately.
So do you celebrate then? Like, not celebrate, I don't know, what should I say? Like, I need to understand. So your nation, or some of you maybe do celebrate, or some have, like, do you celebrate, or do you just go with the flow, or do you, like, I don't see protests as such either, like, right?
Well, there was the suppressed Thanksgiving address from my cousin Frank James, who started the National Day of Mourning and the protests of Thanksgiving in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And that's happened annually since that beginning.
So where can I find this if I want to put the link on my website about when I'm talking to you? Like, is there a link, or did they film it, or is there, and like, how can people learn about this? Is there writing about it?
Yes, I mean, I think it ends up being in the news sometimes.
Okay.
Obviously, if you Google National Day of Mourning, you'll find some information on it. There's Roland James.
Roland?
Roland.
Okay,
James.
Roland, Roland James. Okay.
That's Frank James's son, and is I think one of the main organizers of the National Day of Mourning, and keeping that sort of tradition alive. I've attended numerous protests, as hasn't pretty much most of the Wampanoag people who are involved in the nation and in our communities today. I think most folks have attended or participated or spoken at that event over the years.
So basically, so you don't celebrate, basically. So you're just taking off because you have to take off.
Yeah, I think ultimately everyone is going to give you a slightly different answer to it. Some folks, I don't think any Native folks that I know celebrate Thanksgiving like the typical American does, because inherently it just doesn't have the same warm, fuzzy feeling. We're constantly reminded when we look around about all the lands that were forcibly removed from our society. Yeah. We look around at how well everyone has done off of indigenous knowledge, whether you're talking about the pharmaceutical companies or you're talking about the logging companies or the mineral harvesting companies, or you're talking about, the massive land grabs that turned certain farming families into these, huge landholders where, a single English family took the entire land holdings of a whole Wampanoag community. So
obviously they don't refer to that.
Well, no. Why would they? Yeah. I mean, they did phenomenally well, and some of those same families today have some of that land and have the money that they have, managed to leverage out of all the resources on that land and the sale of some of that land. And not any of it goes back to supporting an entire nation of people that were dependent on it. So, when you look at a Wampanoag family that's struggling in an apartment building, trying to make ends meet, meanwhile, someone is phenomenally wealthy off of the land that should be in their family's holdings. And it's a constant reminder of how the balance has shifted and how, a society that was generous and allowed a small group of people to live and enjoy military protection and knowledge and medicines and friendship and support, how in just several generations they took the upper hand and they were not reciprocal with that relationship, and they were not balanced and kind people, like the folks that greeted them and allowed them to continue to live on property that wasn't theirs, and allowed them to eat, or actually gave them food to eat and provided them with resources that they themselves didn't know how to come across or maintain. I don't think anyone could look at that history, removing their bias or their personal opinion about race and supremacy. If you just look at individual people as just equal humans, you could not look at that story and say that this was a kind and giving relationship where at the end you could feel good about the outcome. There's no one in their right mind who could say that that was the case. There are several million Mayflower descendants today, and there are less than 6,000 known Wampanoag people today. I don't know how that works without genocide and imbalance and devious action and horrific war.
So what do you...
Sorry, go ahead. I think there's a lot of reasons like that Wampanoag people can't really look at this holiday as something positive and meaningful when we can't expect to look around our own communities and look around the areas of our nation today and see anything that acknowledges our people and our continuance. There's very little here that feels like home in our only home on this earth. And that in and of itself would make celebrating Thanksgiving hard to swallow.
Do you have some resources that you can share with us, with me, that people can learn from, that are written by the natives, or you have put down some stories just the way you talked to me today?
There are some folks who are doing a bit of writing now. I think establishing a relationship and having conversations with Indigenous people from various regions helps to not only teach you about maybe moments in history that have a different perspective that have been removed from the telling of that story, but also the layers of humanity that you get from having a personal connection and interaction with people, not just facts and information, but an understanding of people's sense of humor, their gestures, their movements, the sounds and the expressions that are linked to a very specific people and culture and history and how the people actually view things. Because it's not just understanding that, yes, people had this experience and they exist here and this is what they typically do now. But that sort of textbook understanding of people, but the actual connection that establishes a reason for people to honor and respect another type of nation and community and language and right, the reason that we should be getting together and talking about things and sharing and establishing relationships, right? Because that's what changes how societies view the future. I guess ultimately if you don't know a people, it's very easy to dismiss the need to allow them to still exist in this world.
I agreed. Right? Sorry, go ahead. You were saying something?
Oh, I was just going to say it's very easy in this society. Unfortunately, it's easy to disregard whole groups of people, even though communication is so easily attainable now. It's so easy to disregard if you just have controls in place that keep certain people and perspectives out of the media, for instance. Point to any news anchors on any national news channels that have an indigenous anchor and deal with indigenous issues. Not one. I can't think of anyone. Where are the heroes, for our people? Where the young Native children, where can they look to see people who are acknowledged globally or nationally that they want to try to achieve and surpass their achievements? It's hard. I mean, we all are forced to forge our own way and find heroes or find a path that would allow us to maybe have a chance to become some of those people. And yet, in my whole life, I have yet to see someone make it to that level. And that says a lot about the society we live in. We're still fighting for the right to not be demonized by sporting teams and horrific caricatures of a generalized Native person making a fool of themselves as a mascot for the entertainment of the masses. And we can't say that offends us and expect anything to be done about it. We can't expect in this modern society that our women and children that they will be protected and safe, as Native women are 5 times more likely to be brutalized than any other people in this country. It's hard to really get behind a Thanksgiving holiday or Native American Heritage Month, which is November, and still and just feel good about that when you can't feel good about being who you are and feel protected as a citizen of the United States and feel good about what the state of affairs are for Indigenous people in this continent. It's hard. It's hard for us, I think. As Indigenous people, however, we do have our celebrations and our feasts and our gatherings, and those are far more frequent than
just once a year.
We have our Thanksgivings and our celebration and feast times, which go off of the lunar cycle, so 12 to 13 of those gatherings per year, based on the lunar calendar, where you give thanks for the bounty of that period of time, and you give thanks for life and all the gifts of it. In our societies, you don't pray for what you want, you pray thank yous, right? You give thank yous for what you have, and you work for what you want, and you try to achieve your goals, but you always give thank yous for the water every morning, the first water that nourishes you and helps to keep you alive that day. You thank the Creator and all of creation for the gift of life every day when you wake up, because there will come a time when you don't. And, so you want to have been thankful for every gift of every day that you had while you were given it. And, those sorts of thank yous, your thank yous for your children and your parents, your thank yous for the gift of community, and thank yous for the songs and the dances that your ancestors passed down to you, and for the songs and dances that you create because your ancestors are in you, and they gift you with the ability to create new things. All the things that you have to thank the creation for. You take that time every day to thank for life, give thanks for life itself. And then those feasts and celebrations on the lunar calendar are just a chance to give extra thank yous and to dance and celebrate and to acknowledge this bigger communal effort to give thanks. And so the idea and the concepts of giving things are very near and dear to all of our hearts, I believe. And, I certainly can't speak for all Native people, but that's sort of the standard. But as far as the national holiday of Thanksgiving, it's a loaded issue.
So thank you for talking. Yes, please go ahead.
No problem. Go ahead. Absolutely. I was just going to say, for Aquinnah Wampanoag people, which is my community on Martha's Vineyard, we have lands in Aquinnah on the island of Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts, and we have celebrations. We have our Cranberry Day festival, and we harvest our traditional, out of our traditional bog area, cranberries, and we have that's an annual Thanksgiving celebration that we've maintained time immemorial for my community. We have our sort of more open and public gathering earlier in the year on the second weekend of September every year. We have our gathering up at the Circle in Aquinnah, right at the top of the cliffs of Aquinnah. And we dance and we sing and we feast and we have a good time then, and the public is welcome to join us in that gathering. And that's every year, second weekend of September.
Okay.
So we still have our gatherings and our festivals and our celebrations. So yes, and some of those things are open to the public if if people are interested in actually establishing a physical connection to the land that we love and the community that we come from and the songs that we sing. That's a good chance to actually see who we are and interact with our people. And I think it's if we spent more of our time the second weekend of September every year.
I will take some links or something
the weekend
from you
after Labor Day.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think the more that we as a people could come together and celebrate the differences and celebrate the commonalities and establish a relationship, as I said before, an acknowledgement of who and what we come from, and be able to be comfortable in who each and every one of us is and what we're connected to, good and bad, right? I mean, we all have a history, throughout our generations, but you don't have a choice. We were born, and we're born of things that, of people and their stories. And so we don't have a choice in that, but we have a choice in how we're going to live our lives and how we're going to, create more positive engagement in this world and less negative. We have a choice in how we want to carry knowledge forward, how we want to encourage our children to carry themselves, how we do things, the choices we make, so that we don't continue to either perpetuate or advance the wrongs of the past. Right? And I think that's making that sort of change is how we make room in Wampanoag Nation, in Wampanoag territory for Wampanoag people. It's making that choice right now and for the rest of our lives. Each and every one of us, all of us, that will make the deciding, it will be the decider as to whether or not 10 generations from now there could be a conversation between a Wampanoag person and a person from another society or another ancestry. And they could have dialogue and talk about things and views and traditions and values. Or there could be conversations about whatever happened to the Wampanoag people. They're all gone. And do we want to allow that? You know, do American people want to be celebrating Thanksgiving 10 generations from now and also be asking themselves whatever happened to the indigenous people?
Yep, it's a very important question.
If you're going to do religious comparisons, that's a debate that can last a lifetime.
Exactly.
And you typically will find that you're arguing the same thing. Most religions are, yes, there are people who get involved in religions throughout history. Spiritual practices become religious because they become ritualistic, right? And if people with corrupt intentions get involved in the crafting of those religions, then sometimes they can get a little askew. They can become sexist, or they can become racist, or they can become classist, right? And that's usually deviating from the point of the spiritual practice, right? But really, when you boil down most belief systems to their principles, there's the guideline to the same thing.
Yep.
And it's in one person's language versus another.
Exactly.
It's written or crafted by a group of people from this part of the world versus that one. But ultimately, they're typically guidelines for being a good human.
Yep, exactly. That's what
And
I have.
if we were just talking about how to be a good human and getting rid of all of the other issues, and taking the name of a spiritual practice out of the equation, just getting together as people to talk about how to exist and be respectful of one another and of creation, we wouldn't really be arguing too much.
That's true.
It's so I completely hear where you're coming from on that, and
because you can wonder why are you interested? Do you have an agenda? Or somebody might say, why are you why not? Why not? I am not feeling sorry to say. I don't feel sorry. I feel proud to talk to you. I am very honored to talk to you. I want to learn from you. I want to, because I noticed that there aren't many. We are doing everything else. Why aren't we talking to people who belong to this earth, this area, this piece of land? And I want to bring the stories out, whatever level I am. Okay, I have no agenda in that. I just want to talk about. I want to talk about Muslim professional women who are not talked about. They are always considered oppressed, or maybe whatever. Right. So I want to bring them into picture.
Absolutely.
They are professionals. They are contributing as an immigrant. They are doing a lot. And those who cover themselves or are modest doesn't mean that they are oppressed or anything. I don't cover my head. So what? I am a modest person. That's what I think. I don't reveal or flaunt myself. That's for me. That's how I like to be. So. So I enjoy different cultures. I value that, and I respect that. And it doesn't mean I am going to convert into this or to that. I just talked to somebody who had such an interesting background. She is Jewish, converted into Sikhism. She cares about everybody, this and the other. So what does that mean? Whatever. She is who she is, and that's how it is. And I noticed nobody talks about natives or indigenous people, in terms of I don't see you. Where are they? Groton has, the history maybe, and whatever, the whole United States has it, and we don't hardly see them. Now I know, you're not you don't look the same. You are there, but you are in your own way. You have to follow the system and this and the other. You can't have the freedom of having your own ways other than powwows that I see now, or I'm, all the...
Well, there's not.
Yeah. And
there's not a visible space
Exactly.
indigenous people on a daily basis to be a constant reminder to the rest of the population that we're still here.
Exactly.
There's there are some locations, if you're in Seattle, Washington, you might see native artwork and gallery space and a little more presence. If you're in Santa Fe, New Mexico, if it fits the economy of the non-native population, then it's a little more visible. But if it doesn't fit the sort of economy and outward appearance of a place, then we're invisible.
Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much for talking to me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for our wonderful conversation, and I wish you many lucks.
Thank you.
I didn't know where I was going with that.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you for staying with me through this exciting episode. Please don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode of Light Up with Shwa.